It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, TJ KLUNE. Hi, TJ. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I've got your name spelled two different ways on here. It's KL, right? KLUNE?
KLNE, correct.
Okay, all right. I'll just make sure somebody misspelled it on here, but we won't hold them to it. Anyways, well, thank you for coming on the show. I know you've got a book to promote, and the one that we have here is called The Bones Beneath My Skin. I was looking at your website. You've got lots of books. How many books do you have published?
With The Bones Beneath My Skin, this will be my 34th, 35th.
35th, wow.
Something like that around there. I've been going since 2011. I published my first book back in 2011, 14 years ago.
Well, let's go back there. Why did you start writing? Were you doing something else before?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I loved writing. I loved reading. I loved everything about it. Unfortunately, I grew up in a home where that was not appreciated, and I found myself getting made fun of a lot for my love of reading and writing. And I learned early on in that life that something that brought me joy was something that could be taken away. So I kind of fostered that desire in secret. And it was not until I was 12 or 13 years old that I met two women named Mrs. Benson, Mrs. Pfeiffer, who were my 7th grade English teachers, who were the first people in my life to tell me I was good at something, and that was writing. And in my very last class with them, they told me one day they would see my name on a book in a bookstore. And it is because of them I am here. Without them, I don't know where I'd be. But I am proof positive over the power that teachers can have over their students. And I am eternally grateful for them believing in me, because I don't know that I could have gotten as far as I have without that moment in time when I was 12 years old.
Well, it's an interesting story. I'm curious why reading and writing was not appreciated in your house. Was this your parents that didn't appreciate it?
Yes, I grew up, I knew I was queer by the time I was 10, 11 years old. And I also had undiagnosed ADHD on top of that. And unfortunately, when you're living in rural Oregon in the 80s and 90s, that puts a target on your back. And I didn't have a good home life that a lot of kids should have. I didn't have support. I didn't have any kind of hope, any kind of love that felt like it was real. And so I kind of, you could say, retreated into these fantasy worlds that I made up in my head, because it was easier to be in a different world than it was to face reality. And so this was something that I had to grow up learning. And, you know, when you're in a position like that as a kid, it can make you feel very cynical, even before it's your time to feel cynical. So I had to retrain part of myself as I got older to realize that if I wanted to do something such as write a book, the only person stopping me was me, nobody else. And so I decided one day in my 20s, as 20-year-olds often do, that I was going to write the perfect novel and get it published and become something of myself. And 14 years later, I am still on this journey to write as many books as I possibly can for people, because I know how it feels to be underappreciated and unloved when you're a kid.
Which one was your first book?
My first book came out in 2011. It was called Bear, Otter, and the Kid, and it was a family dramedy that is a very much a first novel. It is so perfectly imperfect that I sometimes cringe when I have to reread or look at parts of it, because I've grown so much as a writer since then, and I've learned everything. I didn't know what I was doing when I first started, but it didn't matter, because I had the passion and the hope that I could do something different.
Well, so 2011, did you self-publish it, or did you find a publisher that was willing to take it at that point?
I indie published. I was with a small independent press for the first 6-7 years of my career. And then I wanted to try something different because I didn't want to get stuck in a rut. So I self-published a few novels as well. And then in 2018, Tor and Macmillan came calling, and I signed with a traditional publisher after that, and I've been there ever since.
So the first book did pretty well then.
It did better than anybody thought. For some reason, this small, queer, imperfect book gained traction and was ultimately named by Amazon in 2011 as one of the best books published in 2011, which was something nobody expected, at least of all me. I never expected anything like that, and I couldn't believe it. So immediately I went in trying to write a second novel that completely flopped when it came out because it was so different and so off the wall that nobody was like, oh, this is different. This is good. Everybody's like, I want the same first book that he wrote.
Well, did your publisher, once you got established, didn't they say, come on, give us another one, because that's usually the way they go. If one takes off,
and
they want another
like that.
one.
Yeah, exactly. There were years in early on in my career where, say, like in 2014, 2015, I published 4 books a year with this independent publisher, because when you're in the independent publisher mindset, especially back in the 2010s, there was the idea that if you didn't continue to put out books on the indie publishing scene, that you would be forgotten, that somebody else could just come in and easily take your place. And whether or not that's valid, it almost doesn't matter, because at the time you're thinking, I have to keep doing this. I have to keep working. And not only that, there's kind of a high when you release a book and people read it and they want more from you. You want to give them more. So I completely understand, but boy, I have to be honest, those first few years were a bit rough because I was also working 60 hours a week at my career on top of that.
What were you doing?
I was a claims adjuster for an insurance company whose lizard commercials you probably all know and despise. I was the person who, when you were involved in a very serious accident, if you were seriously hurt, or if you seriously hurt or unfortunately killed someone else in an accident, or if you were getting sued because of a serious accident, I'm the guy you called at the insurance company. And I did that for 10 years working in a cubicle. And it was not until 2015 that something clicked in my head, because one of the big executives came to tour our office, and I was selected for this bigwig executive to come and sit next to monitor, to see how we worked. And I'll never forget when he got done, or when we were done with our session, he looked over at me and said, "You are very good at insurance." And I don't know if you've ever had a compliment like that before, but it is soul crushing to be told you are very good at insurance. So what did I do? The next week, I went in and gave my 2 weeks notice on my job of 10 years with full salary, full benefits. And I walked out 2 weeks later, and I've been writing full time ever since.
Well, that's funny. And it's funny that you say, well, you were so good at insurance. I mean, you could take that as an insult, couldn't you? It sounds like you did.
Well, and I kind of did. It hurt to hear that, because, it's good to be told you're good at something, but I never wanted to be good at insurance. I wanted to be good at something so different that it really, even though I was doing both at the same time, it kickstarted in my head that I can't keep going on like this, working 60 hours a week and then coming home and writing until 2:00 in the morning and then getting up at 6 the next day and doing it all over again. That's something I could do when I was in my 20s and maybe early 30s, but I'm in my 40s now. And so that life just isn't, I couldn't do something like that now. And I'm just grateful that I've been given the opportunities to do what I do, how I do it.
I suppose if one worked at McDonald's and they said you were the best French fry maker, it might have the same ring.
It could, because while somebody is thinking, yes, it was meant and intended as a compliment, you never know how a person is feeling inside. I don't want insurance to be my life, same as maybe a fry cook at McDonald's doesn't want fries to be their entire life. It's just how it is. We aspire for more, and we sometimes we just need that kick in the butt to take that first step.
Yeah, it's probably associated with your identity, which you don't really want to be identified as that. The plaque on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so the new book, which is the 37th book? Is that what you said?
34, I believe. 34.
34, okay. The Bones Beneath My Skin. Give us a little bit of a synopsis of this book, if you would, please.
Absolutely. So The Bones Beneath My Skin is set in the 90s. It follows a man named Nate, who at the opening of the novel has lost everything. His parents, his brother doesn't want anything to do with him. He's been fired from his job as a journalist for some unethical decisions he made while on the job. So in order to find his path again, in order to recuperate, to refresh, he decides to go back to his family's summer cabin in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon, expecting it to be empty. And when he gets there, he finds that, unfortunately, it is not empty. Inside is a man with a gun named Alex, and with him is a little girl who calls herself Artemis. And as the novel progresses, Nate begins to realize that Artemis isn't exactly who she says she is. She isn't exactly who she appears. And Nate's and Alex's role in her life and what going forward, what it means for the entire world, is the genesis of the adventure that they go on. It is about discovery. It is about hope. It is about joy. And it's also about getting to put queer characters in an action thriller, which is something we normally don't get to see. If you think, I grew up with movies like Escape from Witch Mountain, Fire in the Sky, E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind. X-Files was huge when I was a kid. I loved that show, but you never got to see people like me, people from my community, in those kinds of mediums. So I wanted to do what I couldn't when I was a kid. I wanted to write a story that felt like those movies, those films, except I wanted to put my own spin on it and make it queer, make the main characters queer, let them go through the same journeys that so many heterosexual or straight characters get to go through.
There were a couple of shows, but you're right, it was very underrepresented. And depending on how far back you want to go, the representation was very stereotypical.
Right. If especially in the 90s, if you think about what was in the 90s, we were in a weird situation. We were in the Clinton era of don't ask, don't tell. But at the same time, one of the biggest television shows in the world was Will and Grace, which was one of the first critically and commercially successful show about gay people.
Right.
And it was this weird dichotomy. Gay people can exist on TV, but you don't talk about it in your real life.
Well, I always found that interesting how many Hollywood stars still keep that under wraps, even now, because they're concerned that it's going to destroy or hurt their career in some way.
And if you think about actors from eras past, back in, the golden age of Hollywood, when movies were in black and white and there was the biggest stars in the world, so many of them would later be revealed to be gay, bisexual, something. But you're right, it had to be kept under wraps. Absolutely.
Well, probably the most famous one of that would have been Rock Hudson, I would think.
Exactly. Yep.
Except everyone in Hollywood knew, just not the rest of the world.
Right. It was like an open secret. It goes back to the idea of the Clinton era, don't ask, don't tell. You can exist, but you really shouldn't talk about it outside of groups of people who are known to you. That's exactly how it was.
Yeah. There's a show I'm trying to think of. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a funeral home or something. Do you remember that one? And there were gay characters in it.
You're talking about 6 Feet Under.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
Yeah, 6 Feet Under, where it had the same guy from Dexter playing a queer character.
Right.
And the whole show, he was part of it and showed the relationship. Yeah, again, and that was early 2000s. So yeah, it took some time, but they were showing the lives of queer people and how they existed, different facets. When you go from Will and Grace, when you go to 6 Feet Under, very different types of storytelling, but involving some similar characters.
Okay, so why is this called a sci-fi thriller? Where's the sci-fi element?
Because Artemis, Darth Vader, one of the main characters of this book, is not from this world. She is something extraterrestrial, something outside of the scope of our understanding. And Alex has been sworn to protect her, even though she was under the watchful eye of the American government. He decided that the best thing he can do is try to help her get home. And that is the whole point of this book. The whole point of this book is a road trip to find a way to get Artemis Darth Vader, this character disguised as a little girl, to be able to find her way back home.
Oh, I see. Was that a spoiler?
Not really, no. The whole book is the idea of, do you remember when the History Channel used to show actual history and instead they switched over to shows like Ancient Aliens, where it's the guy with the big hair, and every response he has, like, how were the pyramids built? It's aliens. How would this happen? It's aliens. That's kind of funny to me, because obviously we know that that's not how the world works, but what if? The whole point of being an author is the idea, that 2-word question, what if? In the 90s, there was a man named Marshall Applewhite who ran a cult called Heaven's Gate.
Oh, the Nike shoes. Yeah, I remember that guy.
Yeah, and they believed that there was a alien spacecraft in the comet, in the tail of a comet called Hale-Bopp. And they believed that they would all ascend to this comet. Unfortunately, obviously they died by mass suicide, and that was the end of that. But again, it's this idea of what if. And so that also played a role into this book, the idea of cults and the psychology behind them, and how charismatic people can lead others to doom.
It's amazing that still goes on. I mean, there was a lot of that when I grew up. I'm remembering Jim Jones and the People's Temple.
Yep, and you remember David Koresh and Waco.
Yeah.
And if you want a modern equivalent of it, we would look back at the 2016 election, and following the advent and rise of QAnon is a modern form of a cult, almost.
An online one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the internet, at the beginning of the 90s, nobody had cell phones, nobody had internet. By the very end of the 90s, almost everybody had cell phones and almost everybody had internet, which of course led to the idea of Y2K, of something going to be happening to all of our computers, and maybe the world will end. We don't know. It's this idea that once this technological leap happened, that people were connected all over the world, for better or for worse. Because if you can learn about cultures from all around the world by talking to the people who live them, or conspiracy-minded people can find others who think like they do and come together to form something like QAnon.
I was very disappointed with Y2K. I sat up until midnight looking at my computer.
Me too.
Yeah.
We were all expecting something to happen. Do you remember? Obviously you do. You remember the lead up to that, the months lead up to that, all the coverage on the news saying we don't know what's going to happen when the clocks tick over, because nobody was prepared for that. And then, of course, nothing happened.
Yeah, it clicked over and everybody went, Happy New Year. And that was the end of it.
Yep. Exactly.
Oh, no, people thought their bank accounts were going to be wiped out. And I mean, it was amazing.
Thought their computers were going to turn against them somehow. They thought the government would collapse, all of that kind of thing. Basically, Y2K, a lot of people thought there was going to be anarchy.
Yeah.
After January 1st, 2000.
The end of the world. It was going to be, what was that movie, 2012? It was going to be that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And remember when the Mayan calendar supposedly ended in 2012, people are like, is this going to be the end of the world? We take the fantastical and try to fit it into our everyday lives, even if it's ridiculous.
Well, I thought Woody Harrelson did a great job with that character.
Absolutely.
Well, TJ, we got to wind this down. Thanks so much for coming on. Again, the book is called The Bones Beneath My Skin. Has it been released? It
releases on Tuesday, February 4th.
All right. Last question. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Absolutely. You can go to tjklunebooks.com to keep updated with my appearances. And you can also look at my social media at Instagram, TJ KLUNE Books. I post a lot of pictures of my dog.
Oh, well, God bless you for that. Because I do the same thing.
Yes, exactly.
All right, TJ. Well, it was nice talking to you, and best of luck with the book. It sounds like you're doing very well, and hope to see more.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time today.